Urmila's enchantment. My father wanted a son, someone who could be the king of Mithila when the time comes. Yet, when I was born, he couldn't be more proud. Sage Narad had visited our kingdom shortly before my birth. He had predicted that my sister Sita, instrumental to the inevitable Dharmyud to come, our lives would be filled with challenges, and our choices would impact the course of the future. Scared that both her children would have to suffer and face difficulties, our mother pleaded with the sage to bless her children with some comfort. Though he couldn't change destiny, he was moved by our mother's love. He said, I cannot change the destiny, the writings of the Lord, my lady, but I bless your unborn child not to suffer during tough times. She remembered these words throughout. My mother was in immense pain while giving birth to me. When she first held me in her arms, she remembers fondly. I was smiling. One smile made her forget all her pain. She named me Urmila, meaning the enchantress. Despite our mother's futile attempts, our father ensured that Sita and I received the best education in finance, philosophy, and warfare, other than our regular education in science and scriptures. In all the moments that our mother could steal us away from our trainings, she tried to give us a life befitting a princess. As we grew older, our trainings became tougher. Father would send us with nobles to other kingdoms to understand diplomacy and policies, with saints to gain deeper understanding of ourselves and of the universe, with army men to train us for combat and wars. And he took us himself to meet the people of our kingdom, to understand their problems and become better rulers. I grew up with Sita, Madhvi, and Shrutakirti. Madhvi and Shrutakirti were our uncle's daughters, who was the king of the neighboring kingdom. We were all trained and educated together. Some of the trainings were really hard, but having such lovely sisters around made up for everything. We were together all the time. It was all going well until Sage Narad visited our kingdom again. Lord Parshuram had organized a yagna at a place near our kingdom. Sage Narad, the sage with the highest honor amongst all sages, who was free to roam all the worlds and visit the gods as and when he liked, attended this yagna. Impressed with his contributions towards the yagna, Lord Parshuram presented Sage Narad with the holy Shivdhanush, Pinaka, a crossbow that he had won from the Almighty Lord Shiva himself. On his journey back, Sage Narad decided to take a tour of the nearby lands, disguised as a lonely farmer looking for a new land to relocate to. On the outskirts of our kingdom, he was attacked by some bandits. Scared that these bandits would discover the Pinaka, Sage Narad tried to engage them with his wits. At the same time as the lords had destined it, Sita and I were returning from our visit to Madhvi and Shrutakirti. We saw five bandits with swords drawn, cornered a lonely person with no means to help himself. Without a second thought, I jumped off my horse, took my sword in my hand. Sita too had her sword drawn and was charging at the bandits. In a matter of minutes, the bandits were disarmed and tied up. Oblivious to his true identity, we invited Sage Narad to travel with us to our kingdom where we could give him shelter. On the way, Sita and I were discussing our new trainings that we had taken up with Madhvi and Shrutakirti. While we were discussing, the disguised sage spoke. You princesses are well read for your age, your highnesses. You seem to have taken a leaf or two from the scriptures of Lord Shiva. That did not sound like a farmer's word. None but only the highly enlightened spoke of Lord Shiva's scriptures. You don't look like a farmer. Who are you? Reveal yourself, I commanded. At the same time, Sita had drawn her sword and was holding it against his chest. The soldiers had already surrounded him. The farmer spoke no more, but smiled as the soldiers took him captive along with the bandits. When Sita and I reached the palace, our father came rushing out to greet us. Instead of blessing us as he usually did whenever we returned from a visit, he rushed past us to the tired farmer. He kneeled before the farmer and apologized. Suddenly, we were standing in front of a sage who was radiating knowledge more than anyone we had ever met, Sage Narad. We knelt in front of him and begged him to forgive us for our ignorance. We requested him to accept our hospitality for the night, and he heartily agreed. Later that evening, Sage Narad demanded an audience with our parents alone. Next morning, he blessed us all and left. My father, though an able king, was a father. His heart ached for the life that Sita and I were moving towards. One day, he took me to the treasury and showed a magnificent bow. It was the Pinaka. My father announced that he was organizing a swamvar for Sita, the only hope to make allies with the larger kingdom to ensure safety of our people. Chariots started coming in from all directions. As the date of the swamvar approached, Mithila turned to host for nobles and royalties of various kingdoms. I didn't understand the idea of letting my sister marry someone for their attempt at a task, but I knew better not to say. On the day of the Swamvar, our mother asked us to go and pray at the Lourdes Gauri temple. On entering the nearby gardens, we saw sage Vishwamitra along with his two disciples. The young men settled the sage under a tree and came into the garden. From their mannerisms, they seemed like mighty princesses. The taller of the true princes had the strong build of a warrior. He stood with poise, reflected the valor. Yet his eyes bore the tenderness with which he was plucking flowers for his reverend teacher. The next day, Prince Ram of Ayodhya, the other disciple of sage Vishwamitra, known for being just and leading an exemplary life, won the Swamvar. I realized it a little too late that Sita was silently praying for Prince Ram's victory too. Another thing that I became aware was the other prince's identity. He was Prince Lakshmana of Ayodhya, soon King Dashrath, king and ruler of the mighty Ayodhya. His queens and the other two princes arrived in Mithila to bless the holy matrimony. Sage Vashisht and Sage Vishwamitra, who had agreed to grace the matrimony, suggested that it was unwise to separate the four sisters. Just in a blink of an eye, I found myself standing in front of the holy fire with Prince Lakshman, along with Sita, Prince Ram, Madhvi with Prince Bharat, and Shrutakirti with Prince Shatrughan. In the blue dhoti with a golden border and a golden angvastram over his torso, Lakshman walked in front of me around the holy fire, wreath of jasmine flowers hiding his face partially from the veiled face of mine. I had heard of his bravery, but no one had ever mentioned how enchanting the sparkle of his eyes was. The weddings were so grand that all the empire seemed to be immersed in a never ending festival. Lakshman was a wonderful person. He was a man of few words. On our first evening together in the palace, Lakshman told me that he held his mother, father, and brothers in the highest esteem. Their happiness meant everything for him. From this day forth, my happiness would also be equally important for him. The honesty and love of his soul reflected through his eyes. My happiness knew no bound. It was all like a dream come true. On the way to Ayodhya, there was hardly any time that Lakshman and I were alone. Yet his little gestures of love and respect were winning my heart. My life had changed too soon, but who knew it was about to change again? Just after two Ayodhyan sunsets, my blissful dreams turned into nightmares. When King Dashrath announced coronation of Prince Ram as the new king of Ayodhya, Queen Kekai did not take it well. She demanded two boons from the king, which he had once promised her. The first boon was coronation of Prince Bharat as the new king. The second boon was exile to Prince Ram for 14 years. All the happiness melted away from the castle. The darkness set in. When Lakshman heard the news, he overcame with rage. He was angry at the turn of events. How could anyone in their right mind think to exile Ram? He asked. I put a hand on his shoulder. It's just 14 years. When he comes back, King Ram will ascend the throne that is rightfully his. Suddenly, the expression on Lakshman's face changed. He seemed to be in some confusion. It was like he had noticed my presence for the first time. He sat me down next to me and told me he needed to go with Prince Ram. The two brothers had always been together. I smiled at Lakshman and started packing our clothes. I knew him enough by now to know that he would want no less. Even I couldn't bear separation from Sita for such a long period. Lakshman held my hand and stopped me. He told me I couldn't accompany him. I was a princess, and the life that he was going to lead was not suited for me. I protested. Sita was going. A wife had no reason to be in a palace if her husband was going to live in the jungle. I chose to be a wife before being a princess. The more I tried to make him see, the more adamant he became. I couldn't believe my ears, he was just not understanding. I protested again, listen, Lakshman, listen. But he cut me in between. I need you here to take care of mothers, father, and other of your sisters. Please do this for me. Take care of everyone and yourself. He said and left. I sat in my chambers weeping, unable to believe that this was really happening. In one day, my husband, my sister, the people I love the most in the world, were going away for 14 years. I heard the chariot come to take them. I rushed to the balcony to have one last image of Lakshman before he left. He was no longer wearing the robes worthy of the Prince of Ayodhya, but was dressed like a hermit. Prince Ram and Sita settled comfortably into the chariot. Lakshman stood by their side. It seemed that all the people of the city had crowded the palace, each pursuing them to stay. All three looked grieved to leave the people disheartened. As the chariot moved out, Lakshman looked up. There was no sparkle in his eyes. I couldn't hold back the tears. I couldn't see him leave or believe that he wouldn't take me. I cried as the chariot slowly moved out of sight, not knowing what else I could do. The chariot wouldn't have even made to the boundary when the whole affair took King Dashrath's life. Immediate news was sent to Prince Bharat and Prince Shatrughan, who were then not in the city. Messengers were also sent to find Prince Ram and Prince Lakshman. The palace that stood high like the sun at sunrise was sunken into death and despair by the sunset. Darkness engulfed the Suryavanshi palace. Everything has happened so fast that it was hard to accept that it was the truth. Deep inside, I felt that Lakshman would return any moment. The chariot that they had ridden had not returned yet, nor had the messenger. Surely the brothers wouldn't stay away hearing the news of their father's demise. I knew they would come, but they did not. It was getting late enough to be worried. Once again, I stepped onto the balcony and looked down. Except for a drenched street dog that was lying down miserably near the gate, there was not a soul to be seen anywhere. Rainwater had puddled under the lamppost. A breeze ruffled the mango tree in the courtyard, and a few twigs fell down and broke. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Even the moonlight hid behind the clouds. It was like no one knew any light in Ayodhya. Did I hear a soft knock at the door? I turned back, hoping to see Lakshman, but saw a nymph standing in the middle of my chamber. I knelt down respectfully in front of her. She smiled and introduced herself as Goddess Nidra, the sleep goddess. She said that it was customary for every human to sleep every day. Lakshman had made a promise to his mother before leaving that he would protect his brother and sister in law at day and guard them during nights. When he refused to sleep at all for the next 14 years, she was forced to visit him. Seeing his devotion towards his brother and towards his promise, she had offered him an exchange. If another human being took his share of sleep for the next 14 years, he could keep his word. I couldn't believe that was happening. A voice inside my head kept saying that the shock was causing me hallucinations. Goddess Nidra came to me as if reading my mind and said, "Your sacrifice would be of utmost importance to your child, to your husband, my child. It would bring a long sleep to you, and when you would wake, he would be in front of you. I would happily sleep for eternity if it helps my husband, Lourdes. This is the least I could do for him. I'm just upset that if any news comes of him, I wouldn't get it. I wouldn't know what is happening with him," I replied. The goddess smiled and placed a hand over my head. She was overwhelmed by my love for my husband, even when he had hurt me. She said that she'll put me under an enchanted sleep, where I'll be able to see him every time he would think of me. I don't know I was asleep and I dreamt of Goddess Nidra, or I slept as soon as she put me under her enchantment, but I slept. My thoughts before going to sleep were of Sage Narad's blessing to me. I was just amused how everything had woven itself out. My sleep was mostly an undisturbed one. It was mostly just darkness. I felt like I was alone in a very dark place. There was no light. There was no means to track time. However, I seldom saw Lakshman. Once I saw him by the river picking fruits. The other time, I saw him sitting next to Sita as she told him tales from our childhood. Once I saw him talk about me and how he missed me to a strange, beautiful lady. Mostly I would see him by the river, throwing rocks into the water all by himself. This feeling was like being plunged into a vast emptiness, with these moments as the only solace. Every time I saw him, I grew more worried. His limbs had deep cuts, and there were always new wounds on his torso whenever I saw him. Prince Ram looked the most calm of them all. He lived in the jungle with the same peace that he had when he had lived in the palace. Sita was fine too, though the hardships of the jungle had made her a little less delicate than what I remembered. These images were only flashes. Sometimes I would ponder if he only remembered me in flashes, or these few moments were so few that they felt like mere seconds when compared to the great distances that separated us. My first long vision of Lakshman came after a long period of darkness. I saw him on a battlefield. He had a lot of cuts on his body and a particularly nasty cut on his arm that was bleeding. Suddenly, snakes appeared to be coiling from around him from underneath. Before he could react, his bow fell down from his hand and he fell unconscious. Before he fell on the ground, I saw Prince Ram, too, was attacked by snakes and had collapsed. Sita was nowhere to be seen. I shouted. I shouted as loud as possible, but no one heard me. It was all dark around me again. I ran in every possible direction, but nothing happened. For what seemed like hours, I kept looking for a way out. Only if I could wake up someone. Only if I could wake up and tell the Ayodhyan army. They would be able to go and rescue Lakshman and Prince Ram. But no one heard me. Finally, I did the only thing I could. I prayed to Lord Shiva to bless Lakshman, to bless him with my life if need be, to bless him with strength that he emerges victorious in the war. I'm not sure when, but my prayers were answered. I saw Lakshman regain consciousness. Prince Ram was already awake. Both brothers looked a little pale, but otherwise in perfect health. It appeared that they were surrounded by gods, ape men, and a lot of celestial beings. Even before I could see enough of Lakshman to regain my calmness, I was captured by darkness again. The second time, when I found myself in the battlefield again, things had become uglier than before. Just then, something blinding and as loud as Lord Indra's thunder struck Lakshman, and he fell on the ground. I'm sure I saw the ape army fighting demon army. Before everything turned dark, Prince Ram had come by Lakshman's side. This time, I knew all I could do was pray. I prayed with all my might. It might seemed longer than before. I couldn't even keep my mind in focus. What were they doing? Why were they fighting apes and demons? I hadn't seen Sita this time either. I hoped she was well. She had to be well. After a long period, the lights came back. Lakshman was slowly being administered something. Simultaneously, Prince Ram and the ape men were helping him get up. Prince Ram hugged him tightly and started crying. Lakshman seemed unaware of his unconsciousness. He looked well, and then the lights went away. This time I wasn't scared of the darkness. Instead, I prayed for it. It was my friend. I knew enough that Prince Ram and Lakshman were fighting a war. Of course, Lakshman wouldn't have time to remember me during one, so the only time I would see him would be when he got injured, being in darkness when he was well. I hope I would wake up soon. I prayed for these years of suffering to end. I prayed that I should only see Lakshman with open eyes now. There was nothing else I could do, so I prayed on and on. I don't know how long I slept. I woke up in my chambers. My head was heavy and spinning. It felt like a really bad dream. Madhvi and Shrutikirti were by my bedside. The moment I opened my eyes, they hugged me and filled me in with all the details. I hadn't been having a bad dream. Sita had been captured by a demon king. Both the brothers had to war to free Sita. The war was now over. As we spoke, all three of them, King Ram, Queen Sita, and Prince Lakshman, were coming back. I looked at my sisters. They had grown old. I didn't know how long I slept, but I could see how long they had suffered. Madhvi kept telling me the details about the war, how King Ram had saved the entire humankind from the demon king, how he had been announced a universal king. I listened half-heartedly. My head was still spinning, and a quick glance around the room showed me that it was exactly the way I had left it 14 years ago. I went and started tidying the chambers. The inkpot, which was open 14 years ago, was still open. All the ink had dried out. The clothes I had taken out to be packed were still stacked on a chair. It seemed that no one had been allowed to move anything from the chambers. I looked into the mirror. An old lady stared back. A princess worthy of those clothes on the chair was nowhere to be found. I kept going into the balcony, looking out for the chariot that had still not come back. It was like I was still living that day and time over and over again. It felt like forever before someone announced that a Pushpak Viman was headed towards the palace. I rushed outside the palace to where the Viman would land. I could see King Ram and Sita being seated on the Viman. Lakshman was standing by King Ram's side. He wore the same hermit clothes as he did when I had last seen him. There were a few cuts on his limbs, scars that a victor wore with pride. I had waited for 14 years to have a glimpse of my prince. When he got down, he took blessings from all the queens and sage Vasisht. Slowly, in what seemed like an eternity, he walked over to me. There were no words with either of us for each other. I could see his face had grown rugged. It dawned on me that I was married to Lakshman for more than 14 years. Yet, he stood here, still a stranger to me. As my dharma dictates to me, I knelt and touched his feet. He stopped me in between and raised me. For the first time in my life, I looked into his eyes as he looked into mine. The eyes that waited for him for 14 years did not seem to recognize the eyes they had been waiting for. I had forgotten how his voice sounded. What if he found someone else in these years of separation? What if telling me to stay back was a way to test me, to check how much I valued my dharma and I had failed? Worse, what would happen when he spoke to me? Things had drastically changed between us. He had spent 14 years fighting a war. I had slept all that time. Even though we led a life that was far more intertwined than normally possible, life had still made us two very different people. After many silent moments, he bent his head lower and said that he was worried about my well being all the time. There were unknown threats and dangers in the forest. If I had accompanied him, he would have always worried about my well being and would also be guilty of making me go through all that. He worried that while he swore his duty to serve and protect Prince Ram and Princess Sita, he would not be able to just do justice to me. These words broke the ice. What if I had done my dharma, but what about his dharma? I wasn't fighting a war, but I was captured in the worst possible place imaginable. There was just no escape from there. Where was he when I needed him? My sister had been exiled. Should my husband then stand by me to support me? Wait, wait. We didn't get a chance to be husband and wife to each other. In a few days of our marriage, we had lived as a prince and a princess. I stood there before a person I respected, but I didn't know. And I did not expect him to understand what I went through. I don't know how to deal with the years we have lost. I didn't even know where to start making amends. As a wife, I follow him into the castle. As a woman, I'm still in darkness, fighting my way towards the light.